Alright, this video is about the concept of biomagnification and the concept of bioaccumulation. And I wanted to start out by showing you some molecules here. And you don't need to memorize any of the structures or memorize really the names. What I do want you to know about these particular molecules is that they are bad. Now, let me explain a little bit more. These molecules here are some really bad molecules that we call POPs. It means persistent organic pollutants. Again, sounds like a very complicated set of words. It's not really. I mean, we know that a pollutant is something, in general, human beings make them, and we release them into the environment. Oftentimes, not on purpose, but when they're released into the environment, they can have very negative effects on the ecosystem. And so organic simply means that they are made mostly out of carbon atoms. This is a big deal because the molecules that make up our bodies and the bodies of other organisms are primarily composed of carbon atoms. And persistent means that these molecules do not break down in nature. Some kinds of chemicals that we release into the oceans or into water tables, they break down because living things, maybe bacteria, maybe protozoans, maybe fungi, maybe those kinds of organisms can take the molecules that are human beings release and break them down and metabolize them and change them into different things. Unfortunately, these molecules here are persistent, meaning that organisms cannot break them down. So all organisms are able to break down certain kinds of stuff. If you think about the human digestive system, when you eat food, like if you eat a plate of spaghetti, spaghetti is made out of carbs, long chain complex carbohydrates that your digestive system breaks down into simple carbohydrates. And then we know the rest of the story there. Your body uses those simple carbohydrates to fuel us, give us energy. And then when we take those sugars, we break them down even more. We break them down into carbon dioxide that you just breathe out. We also make some water molecules, and nothing wrong with a little bit of water. So we take complex molecules like complex carbs, we break them down. Same deal with proteins. When a human being or a mouse or a dog or a cat or a tiger eats a meal that has protein in it, their digestive systems break down long chains of amino acids. We remember those from Unit A, because all proteins are composed of amino acids. So the organism breaks down those long chains, and then it uses the single amino acids to make its own proteins. So if you're a tiger and you ate or if you're a lion and you ate a zebra, you're going to take the proteins that used to make up the zebra's structure, the zebra's body. You're going to break them down, and you're going to use those little blocks, just like Lego, to make lion proteins, so you can grow and survive. There's a lot of different kinds of chemical reactions that go on in organisms, but unfortunately for us, these kinds of molecules over here do not get broken down in the environment. That means that if you, for example, spill some PCBs, PCBs used in a lot of different industrial processes, also used in what are called ballasts for lighting. So high-powered lighting that you might use at like a hockey arena or like the Shaw Convention Center, things like that where you need like a lot of light output, powerful lights. They use these ballasts to keep the lights at a specific even level. And so these guys, unfortunately, if you throw out a light ballast into the landfill, or God forbid, into the ocean or somewhere else, these PCBs will leak out into the water or into the soil, and then they will cause a bunch of trouble. We'll talk about the trouble that they cause in a sec. One thing that you might notice about all of these molecules, they all have atoms from the halogen family. That's Br, that's F, that's Cl. Sometimes you get some that have iodine. But if we look at all these, that's literally like the most common thing, is that they all have Cls or Brs or Fs on them. It turns out that actually this is one of the reasons why our organisms, like a human body or a rat or a shrimp or a orca whale, why we can't break those guys down. Another issue are these hexagons, and we'll talk about these more in chapter 2, which starts next week. These hexagons with the lines alternating double and single lines, these are called benzene, or they're also sometimes called phenyl rings. A benzene all by itself, as I've drawn it there, is 6 carbons, and each carbon is connected to a hydrogen. And that molecule, benzene, is not great. It is bad news for organisms because it causes cancer. It's a carcinogen. So we don't like those either. Some other ones on here that are a little bit interesting, and yeah, we can see that a lot of these have chlorines and benzene rings. We have a chlorine studded cyclohexane. We'll talk about that later. We have a molecule right here. This is a bad molecule. This is called dioxin. And dioxin is a horrific pollutant. It causes very, very, very severe birth defects and deformities in babies. So if a pregnant woman is exposed to dioxin, it severely disrupts the formation of the child. And I'm not going to show you any pictures of deformities caused by dioxin because they're very, very sad to look at. It's rough. Unfortunately, a story of dioxin during the Vietnam War, there was a particular kind of plant killer that was used. The rationale, the idea was the American armed forces knew that their enemy soldiers, the Viet Cong, were hiding in the jungles of Vietnam, and they were very, very good at hiding and remaining undetected. And so what the American armed forces decided to do is to use this plant-killing chemical called Agent Orange. You may have heard of it. Agent Orange contains very high levels of this chemical dioxin. And because of this, to this day, there are large amounts of soil and bodies of water in Vietnam that are polluted with dioxin. And so to this day, there are still babies that are born with really, really severe, disabling birth defects. We're not saying, oh, my hand is kind of crooked. No, these are really, really severe problems that these kids have, and many of them need round-the-clock care for their entire lives. So it's a very, very sad situation. And it also obviously caused a lot of damage to trees and plants and other organisms in the area as well. But the human cost of using this Agent Orange loaded with dioxin is very apparent. We've got some other ones. Here is DDT. I'm going to be putting up a video that is absolutely mind-blowing about DDT. DDT is an insect killer. It's actually the most powerful, or one of the most powerful mosquito-killing chemicals that exist. The reason it works is kind of fascinating. The long story short is it messes up the development of mosquito larvae, and it also kills insects that are fully grown by messing up their nervous system. Yes, insects have nervous systems. They don't have nerves and a brain like a human being or a dog does, but they still have a nervous system. And DDT absolutely destroys the nervous system of insects. So if you have problems with, for example, termites, DDT at one point was used a lot. It was used to such effect, it was sprayed in California to control mosquito populations. And it was sprayed in such huge amounts that the damage that it caused to small organisms caused a domino effect, and it ended up nearly causing the extinction of the California condor, because it made it so the California condors, when they laid eggs, the eggs didn't have a solid shell. So the shell was kind of squishy and not protective. And so these California condors were unable to reproduce. Thankfully, we stopped using DDT. Levels are very slowly going down. There are still some areas where the levels in certain bodies of water are actually higher than you would expect. But we've seen a little bit of a bounce back in the condor population. So that's, I mean, it's as good as news as you can expect. A lot of these other ones like aldrin and heptachlor, endrin, dieldrin, these are all weed killers. So they attack plants in a specific way, but then they stay in the soil. One more that I'll show you guys or tell you about real quick is PFOS, also PFOA. These guys are heavily fluorinated. You can see lots of fluorines. It's a long chain of carbons with fluorines. This is one of the byproducts of making Teflon, so non-stick cookware. And again, when it gets in the environment, it is persistent, meaning it sticks around. One thing that is very fascinating about these perfluorinated compounds like this, like PFOS and PFOA, if you overheat a non-stick pan, so say you've got a Teflon pan and you want to do a steak, personally I would suggest you use a steel pan or on cast iron. Because if you overheat a Teflon pan, extreme heat will cause some of the Teflon to thermally break down, and it will release it into the air in your house. And it's not great to breathe in. It's extremely bad if you have a pet bird. This stuff will very, very, very rapidly harm pet birds, because birds have very sensitive lungs. So we don't want to really do anything like that. So again, persistent organic pollutants, persistent because they stick around, organic because they're made mostly of carbon atoms, and they're pollutants because they're released by human activity. And they are real hard to clean up. Thankfully, governments around the world have mostly agreed to stop using many of these chemicals, or at least have very strict controls on the companies that need to use them, to try to ensure that they do not release them into the environment. So what happens if they are released into the environment? Two kinds of problems. They are related problems. The first one is called bioaccumulation. So here we have some little baby fish, and let's say that they are living in a lake that has been polluted with a persistent organic pollutant. Or maybe they have been swimming in a lake that has mercury in it, a very toxic metal, or lead, another toxic metal, or cadmium, another very toxic metal. These metals are bad news. So as these individual little baby fish feed in their lake and swim in their lake, the amount of pollution in their bodies increases. And so if you were to go fishing and you snagged yourself an adult fish, and maybe you brought it to your campsite and you decided that you were going to fry it up, have a little meal, these heavy metals or these persistent organic pollutants, or those are the two big ones, whatever's in that fish, when you eat it, it's going to get into your body. And so that brings us to the other problem, which is not bioaccumulation, it is biomagnification. And so biomagnification is when you go up the food chain, and the higher up the food chain you go, the higher the concentration of the pollutant. And so this image specifically talking about PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. So because of industrial processes, we make all these PCBs, they are released into the air. Just an aside, these are not acid-forming chemicals. So they are not your NOx and your SOx. These are different chemicals. They don't make acid rain happen, but they do pollute. So those PCBs get into the soil and into the water. When they get into the water, you can see that they are being absorbed by little tiny plants called phytoplankton. These are just little single-celled plants that do photosynthesis in the water. And you can see that each one of these little phytoplankton, they're absorbing one red dot. And the red dot is just how much pollutant or contamination they contain. So one little dose of pollution for a phytoplankton might not be very much. It might not be enough to disrupt or kill the phytoplankton. And a lot of the time, plants can kind of survive these pollutants. But here's where it gets bad. We move up the food chain. Who is eating our phytoplankton? Little tiny animals called zooplankton. And they feed on the phytoplankton. If you look at these organisms, they have 2 or 3 contamination dots in them. So the amount has gotten higher. Why is that happening? Because one of these little guys has to eat a lot of its food. So it has to eat many, many, many little phytoplanktons. That means that it's going to have more contamination in its body. We go to the next level. We've got herring. So fish. Finally, we're into some fish. The fish eat phytoplankton, and now the fish has 9 dots in it. I'm not going to count the dots anymore, particularly when we get to the end. But you can see that there is a higher amount of the contamination inside of this first fish. Why? Because this fish has to eat a lot of zooplankton. It doesn't just eat one little tiny little shrimp or little copepod and call it a day. It has to eat many, many, many during the course of its life. And then we get to the salmon. The salmon has to eat many little tiny fish, many herrings. So now it has a huge number of contamination molecules inside of it. And finally, top of the food chain, in this particular example, the killer whale. Killer whale have to eat a very large number of salmon in order to get their nutritional needs, in order to get their calories. So the killer whale has a very large number of contaminant molecules in its body. So what it means for this killer whale, it could be now it can't have offspring. Or if it does have offspring, they are extremely deformed and they don't survive past their, past a couple of days or hours after their birth. So now we've destroyed or potentially destroyed the ability for the orca whales to reproduce. Kind of in the same way that DDT accumulates in California, particularly in the 60s and 70s, going from small little insects to mosquito larvae, then to small birds, and eventually to large birds like the California condor, destroying its ability to have offspring and endangering the species, which is shocking, but this is true. So I hope that clears up, first of all, what organic pollutants are, what heavy metal pollutants are, what bioaccumulation is, and what biomagnification is.